Thank you for the great work that you are doing and your leadership for IRI and all your commitment and steadfast courage on these important issues. Um, on behalf of the IRI board, I would like to welcome all of you to the IRI 2020 Freedom Award ceremony. Now, clearly the ceremony looks a little different than it did last year. And as we are still all struggling with the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has transformed all of our lives. As chairman of IRI, I have been very impressed and gratified on how IRI and the other institutes for democracy that we have under the National Endowment of Democracy have adjusted to the challenges of these times, this new normal, and continue to support our partners on the ground, strengthening democracy worldwide. It's certainly a cliche, but I think it's true. These programs are more important than ever. As you mentioned, Dan, the COVID-19 pandemic is straining the foundations of political systems, young and old, authoritarian and democratic. But democracies like ours have history to draw on. We know that giving voice to people to govern with their own consent can seem messy and disruptive at times. But we also know that disagreements ultimately lead to a better tomorrow of greater knowledge, compromise, and progress. We know this because it's played out in our own history time and time again, decade after decade, century after century, and it will play out once more, even during these challenging times for America. Other countries don't always have this history to draw on. They see democracies as unworkable. They see efficiencies in the authoritarian governments and authoritarian systems, the ability to act swiftly, the ability to lie and fool the people they govern. And this is one of our challenges. During this pandemic, we're seeing authoritarian regimes react as they often do, maliciously, with little regard for their own people. And we're seeing democracies, particularly developing democracies, struggle between the balance that they have with regard to the health emergency and the need to protect their own institutions and prevent the erosion of liberty. China's behavior in the past year in this regard has exceeded all expectations and the damage that can be wrought by unconstrained authoritarianism. The evidence suggests that the pandemic could almost certainly have been contained had Chinese Communist Party authorities not lied to the international community, suppressed vital information, and taken aggressive steps to prevent the spread of the pandemic. This behavior is inextricably linked to the nature of the regime itself, which has as its own survival the number one goal for the Chinese Communist Party. It's always important to remember that. I want to mention one other thing that we're seeing with regard to our own challenges as we look at the pandemic. As I mentioned, there are systems and people who are questioning how rapidly, how effectively, how efficiently democracies can respond. And I think it's important to recognize this as an important issue. I want to quote President Truman in a quote that I think is one of the most underrated quotes, so underrated that I quoted it last year in my remarks. But I think that it's so important for all of us to realize that in our history, in our own history, in the history of the world, when these kind of challenges approach, when these kind of challenges present themselves, to be able to look inside and understand our own strengths. Here's a quote from President Truman that he gave on his way back from the Potsdam Conference in 1945. He said, quote, "This war has shown that we have tremendous resources to make all the materials for war. It has shown us that we have skillful workers and managers and able generals and a brave people capable of bearing arms. All these things, he said, we knew before. The new thing, the thing which we had not known, the thing which we have learned now and we should never forget is this, that a society of self-governing men and women is more powerful, more enduring, more creative than any other kind of society, however disciplined, however centralized. We now know that the basic proposition of the worth and dignity of man is not a sentimental aspiration or a vain hope or a piece of rhetoric. It is the strongest, most creative force present in the world. President Truman was right, of course, and indeed the creative power of American democracy has done more to liberate men and women across the globe from tyranny and oppression, hundreds of millions of people, when you look at our history, than any other force in human history. We need to remember that. We at IRI are inspired every single day by the commitment to democracy we see from our partners on the ground, from leading protest movements to the day-to-day work of local government, from strengthening electoral integrity to amplifying the voices of marginalized communities. We're proud to walk alongside our partners in nearly 100 countries around the world. We couldn't do any of this work without all of your support, and we want to thank you again. And we couldn't do it without the bipartisan support of our champions in Congress, and it is a strong bipartisan group of senators and congressmen who support this, including my fellow board members, Senators Joni Ernst, Lindsey Graham, Mitt Romney, Tom Cotton, and Marco Rubio, and Congresswoman Kay Granger. For all the talk about our polarized politics, I am incredibly proud and see it on a daily basis, the bipartisan work for our support, including at the end of last year, significant funding for the National Endowment for Democracy and the institutes that support NED. And I want to thank all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle for their support. But this support has to be made by real leaders who put democracy at the heart of American engagement in the world and who recognize that American leadership must be underpinned by our most sacred democratic values. Which brings me to our first honoree of the evening, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Since he became the Secretary of State in 2018, Secretary Pompeo, and throughout his entire public life before that, has been a stalwart champion of American values and human freedom. From his advocacy on behalf of the Venezuelan people to his recognition of the threat posed by the advancement of the confrontational Chinese party, Secretary Pompeo has advanced the case of global leadership and exemplified the mission and values of the International Republican Institute. He's also a veteran and had served in the US Army for many years, protecting freedom of not just the United States, but our allies abroad. He has led innovation and revitalization in American diplomacy, ensuring that in the grand competition between liberty and tyranny, America is not on the sidelines, but leading. Autocrats know that they have a determined foe, and democracy fighters know they have an unshakable friend. He is also my friend, and I'm honored that he is here tonight. The world is more free, safe, and prosperous as a result of his leadership. Mr. Secretary, as you probably know, the Freedom Award has a long and distinguished number of recipients. At the beginning of this program, you saw a number of them. Colin Powell, President Reagan, Secretary Shultz, Secretary Baker, Secretary Rice, George W. Bush, Secretary Kissinger, Secretary Mattis. Last year, we renamed the Freedom Award to be in honor of one of our great freedom fighters, a good friend of yours and mine and mentor, Senator John McCain. It is now called the John S. McCain Freedom Award. And for your remarkable contribution to the advancement of democracy and human liberty, it is my honor to present IRI's 2020 John S. McCain Freedom Award to Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State of the United States of America.
And the world is made freer by the things that he did. Organizations like RI were a dream when in 1982, President Reagan declared his objective at Westminster to foster the infrastructure of democracy. This is part of it. IRI was started just a year after that. And since then, you at IRI have advanced the cause of democracy on almost every continent. You've been the home of men and women who've upheld America's highest ideals of public service, like the late, great Lauren Craner, whose leadership helped build this institute and whose passing we all mourned earlier in 2020. Look, I'm also proud that my team here at the State Department, 75,000 strong, has a number of IRI alums, including my Deputy Secretary, Steve Began, and Ambassador Curry. I will tell you that they would also be proud that today's award is shared with heroes on freedom's front lines, like the Hong Kong pro-democracy movement and the Belarus pro-democracy movement. Your support at IRI for them embodies your lodestar principle that no human being, none, wishes to live their life with the jackboot of authoritarianism on their neck. And, you know, these brave people know too that Ronald Reagan was correct, that man's instinctive desire for freedom and self-determination surfaces again and again. I've seen it in my now almost 4 years serving in this administration. We've seen it in Belarus, we've seen it in Venezuela, we've seen it in Lebanon, we've seen it in Iran, we've seen it in Iraq, and in countless places, large and small. And these people bear witness to the human desire for freedom. We also get a chance to see it in 12 courageous Hong Kongers who, on August 23rd, climbed in a speedboat and who attempted to escape to freedom. Their destination, a democratic Taiwan, 400 miles away. They made it about the length of a marathon, about 26 miles. They reportedly were just outside of Hong Kong's territorial waters before the security services of the Chinese Communist Party scooped them up. These 12, the Hong Kong 12, are being held incommunicado by CCP authorities on the mainland as we sit here this evening. They've been denied counsel, and they have not been allowed to speak. But they've committed no crime. They simply believe they are worthy of freedom and the unalienable rights that are due to each and every person. They aren't alone in that belief, but America stands with them and all the others. And I know that the International Republican Institute stands with them too, and I know they're encouraged by that. Look, it's why the CCP sanctioned you all. It sanctioned IRI last December, and Dan, you got it just about 60 days later, so good on you. Look, those sanctions are in many respects a badge of honor, because tonight and every day, we simply honor those seeking their own freedom. If we don't do it, if we don't lead in America, no one's going to. It's on us, and that's both a burden and an enormous opportunity. We know it is a fundamental insight of America's first patriots. They understood America's special place and its special responsibility. I hear a lot of talk about America being exceptional, and I hear some who suggest otherwise. I must say, that exceptionalness, I believe in deeply. It's because of our wisdom set upon our founders' ideas, who made it possible in the new world for mankind to move beyond tyranny of the old world. Our nation is rooted in the courage to declare and fight for the truth that all men are indeed created equal, and that they, each of them, are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are liberty, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Our purpose in America, and I remind my team at the State Department of this all the time, our purpose is built on the idea that every human being is made in the image of God. Even those do not carry his grace in their heart. Here, the people are sovereign, and their rights come before the state. A little over a year ago, I formed a commission. I know they can be tiresome, these commissions, but I felt like it was really important. I formed a commission led by a woman named Professor Marianne Clendon to take a look at unalienable rights. It sparked a lot of controversy. That's the that's a vigorous democracy at work for sure. But my hope was simple: to help reground America's foreign policy in our nation's first principles. It's now a report. I hope everyone will get a chance to read it. It takes about half hour to wind one's way through. And the commission found that the unalienable rights are inseparable from the humanity of every person. It found that the American spirit, our American spirit, is based on the fundamental dignity, the rule of law, and natural equality. And it's easy to forget that sometimes. To forget the power of the founding truth is to forget the source of America's goodness and our strength, and the reason we are so respected around the world. I saw this in my career. You mentioned I was an Army guy and you were a Marine, Senator. When I was a young armor officer serving in West Germany, everyone remembers the Berlin Wall. I served in a place called Binlock, not far from a little town called Molderoy. Molderoy had a wall right down the center of it, families that had been divided on both sides of that wall. And just before both of those walls came down, I was reassigned about 2 weeks before that. And I remember calling back to a couple of my lieutenant buddies and saying, "What's it look like? How does it feel?" We'd been patrolling this very wall for years and years and years. And I remember one of them, he said, it's people, they're leaving everything behind. They want to get out. They're not sure how long this is going to last. They're taking just what they can carry in their little cars. And he said, foot traffic too was high and fast. And then he said something profound. He said, and it's moving in one direction, in the direction of freedom. There was no one crossing when that wall came down from west to east, but everybody who wanted just a taste, just an opportunity, a chance to reunite on that freedom side of the wall. It was pretty cool. I got a chance to go back there last year as a Secretary of State. I was in Molderoy with my foreign minister counterpart in Germany. Parts of the barrier 3 decades ago have been left up as a monument. Observation towers, barbed wire. There were reminders as I walked it of the pernicious kind of evil that denies freedoms, the very freedoms that make each of us so human. We see that evil now, keeping people down in the deserts of Xinjiang, in the plains and peaks of Tibet, in the urban streets of Hong Kong, and everywhere behind the Great Firewall. Let me spend just a minute talking about communist China. I've spent a lot of time talking about that over the past months. The predations against the Chinese people, their neighbors, and the world are serious, and we must confront them. The CCP has put more than 1 million innocent people in internment camps where they perform slave labor. It's perpetrated an unrelenting war on faith, even reportedly forcing abortions and sterilizations. This is the stain of the century that tells us the true nature of this regime. And we shouldn't forget, in every place between Hong Kong on the coast and the far-flung Xinjiang, some 1.4 billion people, they're denied basic freedoms of speech, assembly, of association, the press, every other way that human beings choose their own future. The good news is America's rising to this challenge, and it's doing so, Senators, you described earlier, in a bipartisan way. We've seen and sanctioned CCP officials perpetrating their abuses based on laws passed with enormously overwhelming bipartisan votes in the House and the Senate. State departments issued advisories to American businesses so that they know the risks of working with Chinese state-owned enterprises. We're strengthening our military primacy and fortifying a free and open Indo-Pacific alongside friends and allies. I was just a week ago today in Japan, speaking with our regional partners. And then before that, a week, I was at the Vatican to discuss the urgent need for the church's moral witness inside of China. The early years of the CCP and Mao's rise were shaped by Stalin, who once dismissed the power of faith, asking, how many divisions does the Pope have? Pope John Paul II answered that when he went to Warsaw, drawing hundreds of thousands of Poles to the streets for Mass. There wasn't a tank division anywhere that could stop them. That spirit, the spirit of free people, not the vulgar materialism and repression of communism, is eternal, universal, and irrepressible. And it was because of the West's moral clarity and leadership, combined with the unbeatable bravery of those behind the Iron Curtain, that the Soviet Union ultimately collapsed. There may be today, maybe 100 million or more Christians in China seeking religious freedom, as well as millions of Falun Gong devotees, Muslims, Buddhists, and other people of faith. They're looking to sources far higher than the volumes of Xi Jinping's thought or Mao's little red book to guide their lives. They need us. They need the same moral witness today from governments, from religious leaders, from civil society groups that made freedom prevail in the past, and from places like IRI. They need your institution and those like it to stand up for the not yet free and foster institutions and infrastructure of democracy. As past and present honorees have shown, our actions have to be strong and they must follow our words. That means we will work with our European allies, calling for a free and fair election that respects the wishes of the Belarusian people. That means supporting the Iranian people and applying a maximum pressure campaign to deny the number one state sponsor of terrorism resources that permit them to engage in their repression. It means helping the Venezuelan people with humanitarian aid and recognizing that Juan Guaido is the legitimate president, not Maduro and his cronies. It means, too, good works. It means making places like the Middle East more peaceful through the Abraham Accords and working with all of our regional partners, especially our democratic ally, Israel. And it means, too, telling hard truths and strengthening NATO. Truth to our allies that security requires them to shoulder the responsibilities of freedom around the world, just as we're doing here tonight. Look, America's founding principles, our form of government, and our spirit of liberty perfectly suit us to the task in every generation to secure freedom. We must do this. We must do this wherever man's instinctive desire for freedom surfaces. And there are so many places today. Today, we're too being tested again to see whether our great nation still measures up to the best traditions and its highest ideals. I'm very confident that it will. There's so much more to discuss, but I'm going to leave it to you, Dan, to get the conversation there. Thank you again to IRI for this honor, and congratulations to my co-honorees tonight as well. I know you will all keep up the fight. God bless you.